The rescue team froze mid-step, their breath forming clouds in the crisp Montana air as they stared at the impossible scene before them. Ranger Jake Whitefeather lay unconscious at the base of Crying Wolf Trail, but he wasn't alone. 4 massive grizzly bears had formed a perfect circle around his motionless body. Chief Ranger Tom Hawkeye's radio slipped from his trembling fingers, clattering against the rocky ground. "Jesus Christ," whispered paramedic Sarah Martinez, her voice barely audible above the wind. The largest bear, an ancient female with silver-tipped fur, lifted her massive head and locked eyes with the rescue team, not with aggression, but with something that looked disturbingly like recognition. Jake's uniform was torn, blood had dried on his temple, yet his chest rose and fell in steady rhythm. The bears hadn't moved for hours according to the motion sensor cameras. "How long have they been protecting him?" Hawkeye radioed headquarters, his 30 years of wilderness experience offering no explanation. What had turned these apex predators into guardians? And why did the old female bear seem to be waiting for them to arrive? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 3 weeks before that miraculous morning, Jake Whitefeather had been living the kind of quiet desperation that defined too many American lives. At 32, he earned $34,000 a year, protecting over 1 million acres of Glacier National Park, barely enough to cover his cabin rent and the student loans from his forestry degree. Most nights, he ate canned soup and crackers while reading his grandmother's old letters by lamplight, the electricity having been cut twice that summer. The Cherokee Lakota Ranger had learned early that life didn't hand out second chances. His father, Sergeant First Class Daniel Whitefeather, died in an IED explosion in Afghanistan when Jake was 8. His mother Maria worked 3 jobs trying to keep them afloat until the cancer came. Jake still remembered the day she sat him down at their kitchen table, her hands shaking as she explained they couldn't afford the treatments. "Sometimes, baby," she'd whispered, pressing her grandmother's silver locket into his palm, "the forest is the only family we got left." She'd been gone 6 months later. Jake was 12. Now, 20 years down the road, that locket hung around his neck as he patrolled the same trails where his mother used to take him mushroom hunting. He'd never married, never had kids, hard to build a family on a ranger's salary. Most women in Kalispell wanted stability, not a man who risked his life daily for barely above minimum wage. But Jake had something most folks didn't understand. He could read the forest like scripture. Every broken branch told a story, every animal track revealed secrets. The Blackfeet elders said he had the old gift, the ability to speak without words to the four-legged ones. That gift had served him well over 6 years protecting Glacier's wildlife, especially the grizzlies. While other rangers carried bear spray and made noise on the trails, Jake moved like smoke through the wilderness. He'd prevented 14 bear attacks simply by understanding their language of space and respect. The old-timers at the ranger station liked to joke that Jake could charm a grizzly out of a garbage can. What they didn't know was that he'd been doing exactly that for years, quietly relocating problem bears instead of calling for their destruction. In a world where a single aggressive incident could mean a death sentence for a bear, Jake had become their unofficial guardian angel. Chief Ranger Tom Hawkeye, 58 and counting down his final weeks before retirement, had become something of a father figure to Jake. "You got too much heart for this job, son," he'd often warn. "Gonna get you in trouble someday." But Jake couldn't help himself. Every time he looked into a bear's eyes, he saw something that reminded him of his own orphaned soul, wild, misunderstood, just trying to survive in a world that seemed determined to push them toward extinction. He had no idea that one particular bear had been watching him too, recognizing in this quiet Cherokee man the same protective spirit that beat in her own massive heart. September 15th started like any other Tuesday for Jake Whitefeather. The autumn air carried that crisp bite that reminded him why he loved Montana mornings, even if his coffee was instant and his breakfast was yesterday's leftover cornbread. He'd been up since 4:30, reviewing the patrol schedule and checking his equipment. 3 camera traps on the Crying Wolf Trail needed fresh batteries, and there'd been reports of illegal hunting signs near the restricted areas. At 7 sharp, Jake climbed into his battered Park Service pickup and headed toward the backcountry. The truck had seen better decades, rust eating through the wheel wells, a heater that worked only when it felt like it, and a radio that crackled more than it talked. But it got him where he needed to go, which was more than most things in his life could promise. The Crying Wolf Trail wound through some of the most pristine wilderness left in America, dense forests of lodgepole pine and Douglas fir that hadn't seen an axe in over a century. Jake knew every switchback, every creek crossing, every hidden meadow where the elk came to graze. This was his cathedral, his sanctuary, the only place where the constant ache of loneliness seemed to ease. By 2:30 in the afternoon, he'd replaced batteries in 2 camera traps and was hiking toward the third when he noticed them, fresh grizzly tracks in the soft earth beside Whitetail Creek. Big ones. The largest measured nearly 11 inches long, which meant a mature female, probably around 400 pounds. Jake knelt beside the prints, studying the spacing and depth. She was moving with purpose, not wandering or foraging, but heading directly toward the restricted area where hikers weren't supposed to venture. His radio crackled to life. "Jake, you copy?" "Over." It was Tom Hawkeye's gravelly voice from headquarters. "Copy, Chief. What's up?" "Got a family of 4 from Seattle missing their check-in time. They were supposed to call from Bear Creek Overlook an hour ago. You anywhere near that area?" Jake felt his stomach tighten. Bear Creek Overlook sat right at the edge of the restricted zone, exactly where those tracks were heading. "I'm about 2 miles out, moving that direction now." "Be careful, son. Weather Service is calling for an early storm system moving in fast." Jake looked up at the sky for the first time in hours. Dark clouds were building over the Continental Divide, moving faster than seemed natural. The temperature had dropped at least 10 degrees since morning, and the wind was picking up. In late September, Montana weather could turn deadly without warning. He quickened his pace, following the bear tracks as they paralleled the main trail. Every instinct told him something was wrong. Grizzlies didn't usually move with this kind of determination unless they were protecting cubs or investigating a food source. With tourist season winding down, that food source could be careless campers, or worse, an injured hiker. The trail climbed steeply now, winding through a narrow canyon where the rock walls rose 70 feet on either side. Jake had to use his hands to scramble over boulder fields, his backpack catching on low branches. The bear tracks disappeared on the hard stone, but he could smell something on the wind, that musky, unmistakable scent of grizzly. At 3:15, Jake reached the ridge overlooking Bear Creek. No sign of the Seattle family, but their rental car was still parked at the trailhead below. He radioed in their location and continued tracking, following game trails that most humans would never notice. That's when the weather turned vicious. The storm that had been threatening all afternoon suddenly unleashed itself with the fury that only Montana could deliver. Rain came down in sheets, turning the rocky trail into a slip hazard. Jake pulled up his hood and pressed on, knowing that if tourists were caught in this weather without proper gear, they could die from exposure. He was picking his way carefully along a narrow ledge 40 feet above the creek when disaster struck. His boot hit a patch of wet granite covered in pine needles, nature's equivalent of black ice. For one heart-stopping moment, Jake windmilled his arms, fighting for balance. Then gravity won. The fall happened in slow motion and lightning speed simultaneously. Jake hit an outcropping of rock 20 feet down, his head connecting with granite with a sound like a baseball bat hitting a watermelon. His radio went flying, smashing against the cliff face. He tumbled the remaining 20 feet, crashing through small pine branches before landing hard in a bed of wet leaves and stones beside the creek. Blood flowed from a gash above his left temple. His shoulder screamed with pain from the impact. But worse than the physical trauma was the growing darkness creeping in from the edges of his vision. Jake tried to call out, tried to reach for his emergency whistle, but his body wouldn't obey. The cold rain continued to fall, and hypothermia began its silent, deadly work. As consciousness faded, Jake's last coherent thought was of his mother's voice. "Sometimes, baby, the forest is the only family we got left." He had no idea how prophetic those words were about to become. Luna had been tracking the scent for nearly 2 miles when she found him. At 16 years old, she was ancient by grizzly standards, her once chocolate fur now silvered around the muzzle and ears. Most bears her age had already succumbed to the harsh realities of wilderness life, but Luna possessed something that kept her going, a maternal instinct so powerful it transcended the normal boundaries of her species. The massive female grizzly approached the motionless figure beside Whitetail Creek with the careful deliberation of a creature who had learned that humans meant either salvation or destruction, depending on their intentions. But this human was different. His scent carried no aggression, no fierce sweat of a hunter, or the chemical tang of bear spray. Instead, Luna detected something familiar. The same earthy, honest smell she remembered from 3 years ago when gentle hands had freed her from a steel trap that would have meant certain death. Jake lay crumpled against a fallen log, blood seeping from his head wound, his breathing shallow and irregular. The storm continued its assault, driving cold rain through the forest canopy. Luna's sensitive nose told her everything she needed to know. This human was dying, just as her cubs had died 8 years ago while she watched helplessly. But this time would be different. Luna settled her massive body against Jake's left side, her 450-pound frame creating a windbreak against the driving rain. She positioned herself carefully, instinctively understanding that too much weight would crush him, too little would provide no warmth. Her thick fur, designed by millions of years of evolution to survive Montana winters, began working its magic against hypothermia. The other bears arrived within the hour. Boulder, a massive male who served as Luna's lieutenant in their small family group, took position at the head of the clearing, his broad back blocking the worst of the wind. Sage and Timber, 2 younger females who had attached themselves to Luna's protective influence, formed a protective perimeter. They weren't related by blood, grizzlies typically lived solitary lives, but Luna had created something unprecedented in the bear world, a chosen family bound by loyalty rather than genetics. As the storm raged through the night, Luna maintained her vigil with the patience of a mother watching over a sick child. Every hour, she would gently lift her massive paw and place it on Jake's chest, feeling for the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. When his breathing became too shallow, she would shift her position, using her body heat more strategically. When scavengers approached, drawn by the scent of blood, a low rumble from her throat sent them fleeing into the darkness. The motion sensor camera trap, mounted 20 feet away on a thick pine, captured it all. Frame by frame, it recorded an impossible scene, a wild grizzly bear providing medical care to an unconscious human with the dedication of a trained nurse. Luna's behavior defied every scientific understanding of bear psychology, every wildlife manual ever written about predator-prey relationships. By dawn, Jake's color had improved. His breathing had stabilized. The bleeding from his head wound had stopped, clotted naturally under Luna's protection. Most remarkably, his core body temperature had remained stable despite spending 12 hours unconscious in near-freezing rain. Without Luna's intervention, the medical examiner would later confirm Jake Whitefeather would have died from exposure within 4 hours. The rescue came at first light. Chief Ranger Tom Hawkeye had organized the search party after Jake failed to check in the previous evening. The team included 2 paramedics, 3 rangers, and a tracking dog named Buster, who had found more lost hikers than any human in Montana. But it was the pilot of the search helicopter who spotted them first, a cluster of large, dark shapes in a clearing beside Whitetail Creek. From the air, it looked like a typical bear congregation around a food source. Only when the helicopter circled lower did the pilot realize what he was seeing. "Base, this is Search 1, the pilot radioed, his voice tight with disbelief. "I've got visual on our missing ranger, but you're not going to believe this. He's surrounded by bears, 4 of them. And they're not attacking. They're just sitting there, like they're guarding him." The ground team approached with extreme caution, bear spray ready, expecting to find a mauling victim. What they discovered instead shattered their understanding of the natural world. Jake lay peacefully unconscious, his vital signs stable, while Luna and her family maintained their protective formation. The bears showed no aggression toward the humans, only a watchful alertness, as if they had been waiting for help to arrive. Luna made eye contact with Chief Hawkeye, and in that moment, the veteran ranger felt something he'd never experienced in 30 years of wilderness work. Intelligence, recognition, and something that looked disturbingly like gratitude, as if the bear was saying, "I kept him safe. Now it's your turn." The paramedics worked quickly but carefully, aware that 4 grizzly bears watched their every move. Jake's vitals were surprisingly strong for someone who had spent a night unconscious in the elements. His pupils responded normally to light. His pulse was steady. Most of his injuries appeared to be from the fall itself rather than exposure. As they loaded Jake onto a stretcher, Luna rose to her full height, an imposing 7 feet of muscle and fur. But instead of charging, she did something that would haunt the rescue team for the rest of their lives. She approached the stretcher, sniffed gently at Jake's unconscious form, then placed one massive paw briefly on his chest, a gesture so tender, so unmistakably caring, that paramedic Sarah Martinez found herself fighting back tears. Then, as silently as they had appeared, Luna and her family melted back into the forest. But not before the old female turned back one last time, fixing the rescue team with a look that seemed to say, "Take good care of him. He's one of the good ones." The helicopter lifted off with Jake aboard, racing toward Kalispell Regional Medical Center. But the real story was just beginning to unfold in the digital memory of a motion sensor camera, where 12 hours of footage would soon challenge everything scientists thought they knew about the emotional lives of wild animals. The footage hit social media like a lightning strike on dry timber. Within hours of the rescue, a park maintenance worker had leaked 30 seconds of the motion sensor camera video to his Facebook page. By midnight, Grizzly Guardian Angel was trending nationwide. The video showed Luna gently adjusting her position to shield Jake from the rain, using her massive paw to check his breathing, and most incredibly, the moment she seemed to wave the other bears into protective formation around his unconscious body. Jake woke up in Kalispell Regional Medical Center to a circus he never asked for. His hospital room overflowed with flowers, cards, and teddy bears. CNN had a crew in the lobby. His phone, somehow retrieved and charged by a well-meaning nurse, buzzed with interview requests from Good Morning America, National Geographic, and something called Amazing Animal Stories that offered him $5,000 for an exclusive. "I don't understand what all the fuss is about," Jake told Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the same woman who had been on his rescue team. "Bears are just animals trying to survive, same as the rest of us." But Dr. Martinez had seen the full 12 hours of footage, not just the viral clips. She'd watched Luna performing what could only be described as medical monitoring throughout the night. "Jake, what that bear did. It goes against everything we know about grizzly behavior. They don't form pack bonds like wolves. They don't provide care to other species, and they certainly don't organize coordinated protection efforts. Jake struggled to remember anything after the fall. Fragments came back, the sensation of warmth against his side, a rhythmic sound that might have been breathing, the feeling of being watched over rather than threatened. But the memories felt dreamlike, unreliable. The media attention brought unwanted scrutiny to Jake's simple life. Reporters discovered his financial struggles, his tragic family history, his reputation as the bear whisperer among park staff. They painted him as a tragic hero living in poverty while protecting America's natural treasures. A GoFundMe page appeared without his permission, raising $47,000 in 3 days. More troubling was the attention focused on Luna herself. Wildlife photographers with telephoto lenses began haunting the Crying Wolf Trail. Tour companies started offering Miracle Bear Safari packages. The Park Service had to close several trails to protect Luna from the sudden influx of bear-seeking tourists. That's when Dr. Patricia Clearwater arrived from the University of Montana. Patricia brought with her a reputation as one of the country's leading experts on human-bear conflict resolution. Her research had influenced policy decisions across the western United States. But what drew her to the Luna story wasn't purely scientific curiosity. It was the $2.1 million federal grant hanging in the balance. Her university had promised her tenure and a promotion to department head if she could produce groundbreaking research on bear cognition and social behavior. At 45, Patricia carried her mixed Ojibwe and Irish heritage in high cheekbones and startling green eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. She'd earned her Ph.D. from UC Berkeley and spent 15 years studying bear behavior from Alaska to the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. She was also drowning in her own financial pressures. Her daughter Emma's tuition at Northwestern University cost $80,000 a year, money Patricia didn't have without the security of tenure. "Mr. Whitefeather," Patricia said during their first meeting in Jake's hospital room, "I'd like to study your relationship with this bear. What you've experienced could revolutionize our understanding of cross-species emotional intelligence." Jake shifted uncomfortably in his hospital bed. "There's no relationship, ma'am. I fell down a cliff and got lucky that Luna was nearby. That's all." But Patricia had done her homework. She'd interviewed every ranger who'd worked with Jake, reviewed his incident reports, and discovered a pattern that painted a very different picture. Over 6 years, Jake had successfully relocated 43 problem bears without a single aggressive incident. His techniques were unorthodox. He approached bears without making noise, seemed to communicate through body language, and had an uncanny ability to predict their behavior. "You've encountered this specific bear before, haven't you?" Patricia pressed. "Luna, as you call her." Jake's hesitation told her everything. "Maybe. Bears all look pretty similar from a distance. Mr. Whitefeather, lying to me won't help Luna." The Park Service is under enormous pressure to do something about this situation. If we can't explain her behavior scientifically, they'll likely relocate her to a zoo or research facility. Is that what you want? The threat hit Jake like a physical blow. The idea of Luna caged, poked, and prodded by researchers, slowly dying in captivity. It was unbearable. "What do you need from me?" Patricia's research setup was impressive and invasive. She installed motion-activated cameras throughout Luna's territory, set up audio recording equipment to capture vocalizations, and brought graduate students to monitor bear activity around the clock. The goal was to document whether Luna's protective behavior toward Jake was an isolated incident or part of a larger pattern of unusual social cognition. Jake returned to work against doctor's orders, partly because he couldn't afford the medical leave, but mostly because he needed to check on Luna. The media attention had disrupted the entire ecosystem around Crying Wolf Trail. Bears were avoiding areas they'd used for generations. Luna herself had become increasingly elusive, appearing only in distant camera shots that showed her watching the research activity from ridgelines and tree lines. Their first direct encounter after the rescue happened on a cloudy Thursday morning in early October. Jake was hiking alone, officially to check trail conditions, unofficially to escape the circus that his life had become. He found Luna in a meadow where he'd seen her many times before, but now she seemed different, warier. The constant human presence had stressed her, made her skittish in ways that broke Jake's heart. But when she saw him, something extraordinary happened. Luna approached slowly, her massive head lowered in what Jake recognized as a submissive, non-threatening posture. She stopped 3 feet away and did something that Patricia's hidden cameras would later capture in stunning detail. She placed a large pine cone at Jake's feet. Gift-giving behavior in bears was virtually unknown. Wolves sometimes brought food to their pack leaders. Dolphins had been observed offering fish to humans. But grizzly bears were solitary creatures who hoarded resources rather than sharing them. Luna's gesture defied every scientific understanding of her species' social capabilities. Jake knelt down and picked up the pine cone, still warm from Luna's mouth. "Thank you, girl," he whispered. "But you shouldn't be bringing attention to yourself. These people, they don't understand what you are." Luna seemed to listen, her intelligent dark eyes focused on his face. Then she did something even more remarkable. She extended one massive paw and gently touched Jake's chest, right over his heart. The gesture was so human, so filled with recognizable emotion, that Jake felt tears he couldn't explain burning behind his eyes. The footage from that encounter would become the most viewed animal video in internet history, accumulating over 50 million views in the first week. But it also sealed Luna's fate as far as federal wildlife authorities were concerned. Behavior. This anomalous represented either a significant scientific breakthrough or a dangerous breakdown of natural instincts. Either way, Luna had become too important and too unpredictable to remain in the wild. Patricia found herself caught between the scientific opportunity of a lifetime and growing emotional attachment to both Luna and Jake. Her daily reports to the university grew increasingly conflicted. Luna was exhibiting behaviors that challenged fundamental assumptions about animal consciousness, but the research was also clearly causing the bear significant stress. The pressure from above intensified when Dr. Michael Sterling arrived from the Department of Fish and Wildlife. Sterling brought federal authority and a mandate to resolve the Luna situation before someone got hurt. He was a by-the-book administrator who saw animals as biological resources to be managed, not individuals with rights or feelings. "Dr. Clearwater," Sterling announced during an emergency meeting at park headquarters. "Your research phase is concluded. We're implementing immediate relocation protocols for the subject animal. Luna will be tranquilized and transported to the National Zoo in Washington, D.C., where she can be studied in a controlled environment." Jake, who had been excluded from the meeting but was listening outside the door, felt his world collapse. Luna in a concrete enclosure, thousands of miles from her mountain home, becoming a tourist attraction for families eating cotton candy and taking selfies. It was everything he'd dedicated his life to preventing. That night, Jake made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He couldn't fight the federal government, couldn't match their resources or authority, but he could do one thing. He could warn Luna. He'd spent enough time with her to know she understood danger, understood when to run and hide. The question was whether she would listen, or whether her inexplicable attachment to him would override her survival instincts. The confrontation came at dawn on October 15th, exactly 1 month after Jake's fall. Dr. Sterling arrived with a federal wildlife team that looked more like a military operation than a scientific expedition. 3 black SUVs with government plates, a specialized transport trailer with reinforced steel caging, and 6 armed personnel carrying enough tranquilizer equipment to sedate a small herd of elephants. Jake had spent the night in Luna's territory, hoping to intercept her before the capture team arrived. He'd brought apples and honey, against every regulation he'd ever sworn to uphold, trying to lure her deeper into the wilderness where the government trucks couldn't follow. But Luna seemed to sense the approaching danger. She appeared at the edge of the meadow just as the federal convoy reached the trailhead parking area. Patricia stood between two worlds, her scientific equipment packed and ready, her heart breaking as she watched Sterling's team methodically prepare their operation. She'd spent 3 weeks documenting Luna's extraordinary behavior, accumulating data that could reshape understanding of animal consciousness. But she'd also grown to love this remarkable bear, to see her as an individual rather than a research subject. "Dr. Clearwater," Sterling barked through his radio headset, "confirm the target's location. We need a clean shot for the tranquilizer." Patricia raised her binoculars toward the meadow where Jake stood protectively near Luna. The bear showed no signs of aggression, but her body language radiated tension. She knew. Somehow, Luna understood that these humans meant capture, meant the end of her freedom. "She's approximately 200 yards northeast of my position," Patricia reported, her voice mechanical. Adult female, estimated 450 pounds, displaying defensive but non-aggressive posture. Jake's radio crackled with Chief Ranger Hawkeye's voice. "Son, you need to clear the area immediately. This is a federal operation. You don't have authority to interfere." But Jake had already made his choice. He stepped directly between Luna and the approaching capture team, spreading his arms wide. "No!" he called out, his voice carrying across the meadow. "She hasn't hurt anyone. She doesn't deserve this." Sterling's team fanned out in professional formation, tranquilizer rifles raised. The lead marksman, a federal wildlife specialist named Reynolds, had a clear shot at Luna's massive shoulder. The drug load was calibrated precisely for her estimated weight, enough to drop her in less than 2 minutes, but not enough to cause permanent harm. "Stand down, Ranger Whitefeather," Sterling commanded through a bullhorn. "You're interfering with a federal wildlife management operation. Move away from the subject immediately or face arrest." Luna seemed to understand the gravity of the situation. She approached Jake slowly, her massive head lowered, and did something that would haunt everyone present for the rest of their lives. She positioned herself directly behind Jake, using his human body as a shield, then gently placed her enormous paws on his shoulders. The gesture was unmistakably protective, not of herself, but of him. "Jesus Christ," whispered Reynolds, lowering his rifle. "It's like she's trying to protect him from us." Patricia watched through her binoculars as Luna performed this act of impossible selflessness. Every instinct should have told the bear to flee, to use her superior speed and knowledge of the terrain to escape into the deep wilderness. Instead, she was shielding the human who had become her unlikely family. "Take the shot," Sterling ordered. "We have a clear target on the animal's rear flank." That's when Patricia broke. 20 years of scientific training, her entire career, her daughter's college fund. None of it mattered compared to what she was witnessing. "Wait!" she called out, running toward Sterling. "You need to know something first, about Luna's history, about why she's behaving this way." Sterling barely glanced at her. "Doctor Clearwater, your research phase is concluded. Stand clear." "My father killed her cubs," Patricia shouted, loud enough for everyone to hear. 8 years ago. My father was an illegal bear hunter and he killed Luna's 3 cubs in steel traps. This bear has every reason to hate humans, but instead she's protecting one. Doesn't that tell you something about who she really is?" The meadow fell silent, except for the wind through the pines. Even Sterling seemed momentarily stunned by the revelation. Patricia had never spoken publicly about her father's crimes, had built her entire career trying to atone for his legacy of destruction. Luna must have sensed the shift in tension. She stepped out from behind Jake, facing the federal team with a dignity that was heartbreaking to witness. She wasn't running. She wasn't fighting. She was surrendering herself to protect the human she'd adopted as family. Jake turned to face her. And in that moment, everyone present witnessed something that transcended species barriers. Luna lowered her massive head and touched her forehead to Jake's chest, right over his heart. The gesture was so tender, so filled with recognizable love, that several of the federal agents found themselves blinking back tears. "She's saying goodbye," Patricia whispered. "She knows what's coming, and she's saying goodbye." Reynolds raised his rifle again, but his hands were shaking. "Sir, I can't. She's not acting like a wild animal." "She's acting like family," Jake finished, his voice breaking. "She's acting like family." That's when Luna made her choice. She stepped away from Jake, looked directly at the capture team, and lay down in the grass. The submission was complete, voluntary, heartbreaking. She was offering herself to save Jake from any consequences of his interference. Sterling's voice was quieter now, uncertain. "Take the shot. Quick and clean." The tranquilizer dart hit Luna in the shoulder with a soft thud. She barely flinched, just continued to watch Jake with those intelligent dark eyes as the sedative began to work. Her breathing slowed, her massive head lowered to the grass, but her gaze never left Jake's face. As Luna lost consciousness, something extraordinary happened. From the surrounding forest came a sound that none of the humans had ever heard before, a low, mournful chorus of bare vocalizations. Boulder, Sage, and Timber had witnessed their matriarch's capture, and they were mourning. Patricia found herself sobbing openly as the federal team loaded Luna's unconscious body into the transport trailer. This magnificent creature, who had shown more nobility and selflessness than most humans Patricia knew, was being sentenced to life in captivity for the crime of caring too much. Jake stood frozen in the meadow long after the convoy disappeared down the mountain road. Chief Ranger Hawkeye approached carefully, expecting anger or breakdown. Instead, he found Jake staring at the flattened grass where Luna had lain, holding the pine cone she'd given him weeks earlier. "She knew," Jake said quietly. "She knew they were coming for her, and she stayed anyway, to protect me." "Son, there was nothing you could have done differently." Jake turned to his mentor with eyes that held a new kind of pain. "She saved my life, Tom. And I couldn't save hers." The aftermath hit the media like a Category 5 hurricane. Video of Luna's voluntary surrender, combined with Patricia's revelation about her father's past, created a perfect storm of public outrage. Free Luna became the most trending hashtag in American social media history. Protests erupted outside the National Zoo. Celebrity activists demanded congressional hearings. Children across the country wrote letters to the president begging for Luna's release. But Luna was already hundreds of miles away, locked in a concrete and steel enclosure, slowly dying of a broken heart while scientists poked and prodded her magnificent body in the name of research. Jake submitted his resignation that evening. After 6 years of protecting Glacier's wildlife, he couldn't bear to wear the uniform that had failed to protect the one animal who mattered most. Chief Ranger Hawkeye tried to talk him out of it, but Jake's mind was made. "She trusted me," Jake said, packing his few belongings into cardboard boxes, "and I let her down." What Jake didn't know was that Patricia was also packing, preparing for a journey to Washington, D.C. that would either save Luna's life or destroy Patricia's career forever. Because sometimes, she'd realized, there were things more important than tenure, more important than financial security, more important than playing by rules written by people who had never looked into the eyes of a bear saying goodbye. The National Zoo in Washington, D.C. had never housed a bear quite like Luna. Within 48 hours of her arrival, the veterinary staff knew they were dealing with something unprecedented. Not just her size or age, but her complete refusal to adapt to captivity. Luna wouldn't eat. She wouldn't drink. She simply lay in the far corner of her concrete enclosure, facing the wall, as if she had decided to will herself to death. Dr. Amanda Chen, the zoo's chief veterinarian, had treated hundreds of bears during her 20-year career. She'd seen depression in captive animals before, but nothing like this. "It's like she's in mourning," Dr. Chen explained to the zoo director during their emergency meeting. "Her cortisol levels are off the charts. Her white blood cell count suggests her immune system is shutting down. If she doesn't start eating within 72 hours, we're going to lose her." The public pressure was mounting. Free Luna had exploded beyond social media into mainstream consciousness. Protesters lined the sidewalks outside the zoo 24 hours a day, many of them families with children holding handmade signs reading, "Luna wants to go home" and "Bears belong in the wild." The story had captured something deep in the American psyche, the belief that freedom was worth more than safety, that love transcended species, that some bonds were too sacred to break. Meanwhile, Jake sat in his empty cabin in Montana, drinking cheap whiskey and watching the news coverage with the sound turned off. He'd sold most of his possessions to pay the medical bills from his fall. His resignation from the Park Service meant losing his cabin in 3 weeks. Everything he'd built over 6 years was crumbling, but none of it mattered compared to the images on the television screen, Luna lying motionless in a concrete box, slowly dying of a broken heart. The breaking point came on the 3rd day. Sarah Crow Dog, the 70-year-old Blackfeet elder who had been following Luna's story from the beginning, arrived unannounced at Jake's door. She'd driven 8 hours from the reservation, bringing with her a small leather pouch and a lifetime of wisdom about the sacred relationship between humans and animals. "That bear is dying because she thinks you abandoned her," Sarah said without preamble, settling into Jake's only chair as if she'd been invited. "In our tradition, when you accept an animal as family, that bond doesn't break just because white men with guns show up." Jake looked up from his whiskey glass with eyes that had lost their light. "What am I supposed to do, Sarah? Storm the National Zoo? I'm nobody. A failed ranger with no money and no influence." Sarah opened her leather pouch and pulled out something that made Jake's breath catch, a bear claw necklace that looked ancient, polished smooth by generations of hands. "My grandfather wore this when he was a bear speaker, before the reservations, before the government decided they knew better than thousands of years of wisdom. You have the gift, Jake. Luna recognized it. She chose you as family. The gift is worthless if I can't protect her. Who says you can't?" Sarah's weathered hands worked the bear claw necklace as she spoke. "That bear saved your life, gave you a second chance. What are you doing with it? Sitting here feeling sorry for yourself while she dies in a cage?" The words hit Jake like a physical blow. He thought about Luna's final moments of freedom, how she'd touched her forehead to his chest in a gesture of pure love before surrendering herself to save him from consequences, how she'd trusted him completely, and how he'd failed her completely. Dr. Patricia Clearwater was having her own crisis of conscience 1,200 miles away in Washington, D.C. She'd spent 3 days in meetings with federal officials, zoo administrators, and university bureaucrats, all of whom seemed more concerned with liability and protocol than with Luna's rapidly deteriorating condition. "Dr. Clearwater," said Dr. Harrison Millfield, the university's dean of research, during their final meeting, You need to understand the position you've put us in. The federal grant money is contingent on completed research. If Luna dies in captivity, we lose the entire $2.1 million. Your daughter's tuition depends on this funding. Patricia stared at the conference room table, thinking about Luna's gentle touch against Jake's chest, about the way she'd voluntarily surrendered to protect someone she loved. "My father spent his life taking from the natural world," she said quietly. "I won't spend mine doing the same thing." That evening, Patricia made a decision that would change everything. She called Jake's number, which she'd memorized from the incident reports. His voice sounded hollow when he answered, like a man who'd given up hope. "Jake, it's Patricia Clearwater. I'm in Washington. Luna is dying." "I know. I've been watching the news." "She's not just sick, Jake. She's giving up. The veterinarians think she's in mourning, but I think it's more than that. I think she's waiting." "Waiting for what?" Patricia took a deep breath. "Waiting for you. Jake, I need to tell you something about my research, about what I really discovered during those weeks of observation." Over the next hour, Patricia revealed the truth she'd hidden from her reports, the data she'd buried to protect Luna from even more invasive study. Luna hadn't just saved Jake's life that night. She'd been protecting humans in Glacier National Park for years. Patricia had documented 12 separate incidents where Luna had guided lost hikers to safety, scared off aggressive male bears who might have attacked tourists, and even once pushed a child away from a cliff edge when the parents weren't watching. "She's not just unusually intelligent," Patricia explained. "She's chosen to be a guardian. Your park service has been protected by a bear who decided humans were worth saving, and nobody even knew it." Jake felt something stirring in his chest for the first time since Luna's capture. Not hope exactly, but purpose. "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to come to Washington. I want you to see her. And then I want you to help me figure out how to get her home." "Patricia, they'll arrest us. Federal charges. Prison time." "Maybe. But Jake, if we don't do something, Luna dies in 72 hours. And if Luna dies, a part of the natural world dies with her. Something that took millions of years to evolve. A bear who chose love over survival instincts will be gone forever." Jake looked at Sarah Crow Dog, who had been listening to the conversation with the serene patience of someone who understood that some decisions could only be made by the heart. She nodded once, touching the bear claw necklace. "I'll be on the first flight out," Jake said. The National Zoo at night was a different world. Security was tight, but not impenetrable, especially for someone who'd spent 6 years moving silently through wilderness terrain. Patricia's research credentials got them past the initial checkpoints. Jake's ranger training got them through the shadows between patrol routes. Luna's enclosure sat in the heart of the zoo's bear habitat, a sterile concrete space that bore no resemblance to the mountain meadows where she'd spent her life. Floodlights illuminated every corner, eliminating the natural rhythms of darkness that bears needed for emotional stability. When Jake approached the viewing area, Luna was lying motionless against the far wall, her magnificent fur dulled, her breathing shallow. But something made her lift her head, perhaps his scent on the wind, perhaps something deeper than the physical senses. Their eyes met across 40 feet of concrete and steel, and Jake felt his heart break all over again. Luna struggled to her feet, moving like an old woman with arthritis, rather than the powerful predator she'd been just days ago. She approached the barrier slowly, and when she reached the thick glass, she did something that made Patricia gasp. Luna placed her massive paw against the glass, directly over where Jake's heart would be if the barrier weren't between them. The gesture was unmistakable. The same loving touch she'd given him in the meadow, the same goodbye she'd offered before surrendering herself to save him. Jake pressed his hand against the glass, matching Luna's paw print exactly. "I'm sorry, girl," he whispered. "I'm so sorry I let them take you." Luna's response changed everything. Instead of the despair Patricia expected, the bear's eyes seemed to brighten. She huffed once, a sound Jake recognized as contentment rather than distress. Luna wasn't angry with him. She'd been waiting for him to come, waiting to know that their bond hadn't been broken by distance or concrete walls. And in that moment, Jake understood what Sarah Crow Dog had been trying to tell him. The gift wasn't just about communicating with animals. It was about understanding that some connections transcended physical barriers, that family meant never giving up, no matter how impossible the odds seemed. "We're going to get you home," Jake promised, his voice steady for the first time in days. "I don't know how, but we're going to get you home." The revelation came at 3 in the morning in the cramped motel room where Jake and Patricia were planning what amounted to the most audacious animal rescue in American history. Patricia had been reviewing her father's hunting journals, documents she'd kept hidden for 20 years, when she found the entry that changed everything. "Jake," she whispered, her voice trembling as she read from a water-stained notebook. "Listen to this. It's from 8 years ago, dated September 23rd. Found the female with her cubs near Whitetail Creek. 3 young ones, maybe 6 months old. The traps worked perfect. Got all 3 cubs, but the mother escaped. She fought like hell, got herself cut up bad on the steel jaws trying to save them. Never seen a bear so desperate. Almost felt sorry for her." Jake felt sick. "Your father wrote that?" "There's more." Patricia's hands shook as she turned the page. "October 1st. The female keeps coming back to where her cubs died. Been 2 weeks now. She just sits there, like she's waiting for them to come home. Johnson says I should track her down, finish the job, but something about it don't feel right. That bear's already been punished enough." The pieces fell into place with horrifying clarity. Luna's protective behavior, her willingness to adopt Jake as family, her extraordinary maternal instincts toward humans in distress. It all stemmed from a loss so profound it had rewired her fundamental nature. She'd lost her biological children to human cruelty, so she'd dedicated her life to protecting human children from the wilderness that had failed to protect her own. "She's been carrying that grief for 8 years, Jake said, staring at the ceiling of their dingy motel room. "Every time she saved a hiker, every time she guided someone to safety, she was trying to save the cubs she couldn't protect." Patricia closed the journal, tears streaming down her face. "My father destroyed her family. And now the government is destroying her spirit. She doesn't deserve this, Jake. She deserves better than dying in a concrete box." But their planning session was interrupted by Patricia's cell phone ringing at 3:47 a.m. Dr. Chen's voice was urgent, professional, frightened. "Doctor, Clearwater, you need to get to the zoo immediately. Luna is in critical condition. Her heart rate is dropping, and she's showing signs of complete system shutdown. We think she's giving up." The veterinary hospital at the National Zoo buzzed with activity when they arrived. Luna had been sedated and moved to the medical facility, where teams of specialists were running every test imaginable. IV fluids dripped into her massive forearm. Monitors tracked her vital signs with electronic precision. But all the technology in the world couldn't address what was really killing her, the complete breakdown of her will to live. "It's unlike anything I've ever seen, Doctor." Chen explained to Patricia and Jake as they stood outside Luna's treatment room. Physically, she should be fine. The tranquilizer from her capture has cleared her system. Her blood work shows no signs of disease or infection. But psychologically, she's shutting down. It's like she's made a conscious decision to die. Through the observation window, Jake could see Luna lying motionless on the examination table, surrounded by machines and medical staff who didn't understand that they were trying to save a creature who had already made peace with death. Her breathing was shallow, irregular, Her magnificent fur looked dull under the fluorescent lights. Most heartbreaking of all, her eyes were open but empty, staring at nothing. "Can I go in?" Jake asked. Dr. Chen shook her head. "Mr. Whitefeather, she's heavily sedated. She won't know you're there, and frankly, it might be dangerous." Bears under stress can be unpredictable, even when medicated. But Patricia had been studying Luna's behavioral patterns for weeks. She knew something the veterinarians didn't. Dr. Chen, with respect, Luna has never shown aggression toward Jake, not once. In fact, the opposite is true. Her stress levels decreased whenever he was present during our field observations. The argument that followed involved 3 department heads, 2 federal wildlife officials, and a zoo director who was fielding angry phone calls from congressional offices. While they debated protocol and liability, Luna's heart rate continued to drop. The monitors showed the systematic shutdown of a magnificent life force, and no amount of human intervention could reverse it. That's when Jake made a decision that would either save Luna's life or end his own freedom forever. While the officials argued in the hallway, he slipped into Luna's treatment room. The massive bear lay still as death on the examination table, but her dark eyes tracked his movement as he approached. Jake could see recognition flickering in those depths, not just awareness, but something that looked like relief. Luna had been waiting for him. "Hey, girl," Jake whispered, placing his hand gently on her massive head. "I'm here. I'm sorry it took me so long to come." The response was immediate and measurable. Luna's heart rate, which had been dropping steadily for hours, began to stabilize. Her breathing deepened. Most remarkably, she managed to lift her enormous paw and place it over Jake's hand, the same gesture of connection they'd shared through the glass barrier. Dr. Chen, who had followed Jake into the room, watched in amazement as Luna's vital signs improved with his presence. "This is impossible," she murmured, checking the monitors. "Her cortisol levels are dropping. Brain activity is increasing. It's like she's coming back to life." But the moment was shattered by Dr. Sterling's voice from the doorway. "Mr. Whitefeather, step away from the animal immediately. You're in violation of multiple federal statutes." Jake didn't move. He kept his hand on Luna's head, feeling her strength returning under his touch. "She's dying without contact. Look at the monitors. You're killing her with isolation." "That animal is federal property under scientific study," Sterling replied coldly. "Your unauthorized contact is contaminating the research environment." "She's not property," Jake said, his voice gaining strength. "She's family." Patricia stepped forward, her scientific career balanced on a knife's edge. "Dr. Sterling, the data is undeniable. Luna's physiological responses to Jake's presence suggest a bonding mechanism that transcends normal animal behavior. If we're truly interested in understanding this phenomenon, we need to study the relationship, not destroy it." But Sterling had his orders from Washington. The Luna situation had become a political liability. Animal rights groups were demanding her release. Scientists were debating her consciousness. Politicians were feeling pressure from constituents who saw Luna as a symbol of government overreach. The simplest solution was to let nature take its course. If Luna died in captivity, the problem would resolve itself. "Dr. Clearwater, your research phase ended when the animal was secured," Sterling said. "Mr. Whitefeather, you have 30 seconds to remove yourself, or you'll be arrested for interfering with a federal operation." Jake looked down at Luna, whose eyes held an intelligence and sadness that cut through his soul. She was trusting him again, the way she'd trusted him in the meadow when she surrendered herself to save him. This time, he wouldn't let her down. "Then arrest me," Jake said quietly. "Because I'm not leaving her alone to die." The confrontation that followed would be replayed on every news channel in America. Security guards entering the veterinary suite. Jake refusing to move from Luna's side. Patricia placing herself between Sterling and the treatment table, her scientific credentials finally used for something more important than academic advancement. But the most powerful moment came when Luna, despite her sedation and weakness, struggled to sit up on the examination table. She positioned herself between the advancing security guards and Jake, her massive body serving as a shield. Even dying, even trapped, Luna's instinct was to protect the human who had become her chosen family. The image of a dying bear protecting a defenseless man from armed government agents became the defining photograph of the 21st century's animal rights movement. It captured everything Americans wanted to believe about loyalty, family, and the bonds that transcended species barriers. Dr. Chen, who had dedicated her career to helping animals, made a decision that would cost her job but save her soul. "Everyone out," she ordered, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had finally found her moral center. "This bear is under my medical care, and I'm declaring that human contact is essential for her treatment. Anyone who interferes with my patient's care will answer to the American Veterinary Medical Association." Sterling's face turned red with fury. "Dr. Chen, you're making a career-ending mistake." "Maybe," she replied, adjusting Luna's IV with steady hands. "But some things are more important than careers." As the officials retreated to plan their next move, Jake remained at Luna's side, watching her vital signs strengthen with each passing hour. Patricia documented everything, knowing that this data would either revolutionize animal psychology or end up buried in classified government files. But neither of them realized that Luna was carrying a secret that would change everything. A secret that would transform their desperate rescue mission into something far more precious than anyone could have imagined. The secret revealed itself during Luna's third night in the veterinary ward, when Dr. Chen was conducting what she thought would be a routine examination. Jake had been sleeping in a chair beside Luna's treatment table, his hand resting on her massive shoulder, the physical contact serving as a lifeline that kept her vital signs stable. Patricia had been documenting their interaction, collecting data that challenged every scientific assumption about interspecies bonding. It was Dr. Chen's gentle probing of Luna's abdomen that discovered the truth. Her experienced hands detected something that changed everything, a subtle firmness, a barely perceptible swelling that spoke of new life growing within the 16-year-old bear. "Oh my God," Dr. Chen whispered, her veterinary training warring with her amazement. "She's pregnant." The words hit Jake like a physical blow. He looked down at Luna, whose intelligent eyes seemed to hold a secret sadness he was only now beginning to understand. At 16 years old, Luna was ancient by grizzly standards, well past the normal age for reproduction. The stress of captivity should have made pregnancy impossible. Yet somehow, despite 8 years of grief and loss, Luna's body had defied the odds. "How long?" Patricia asked, her scientific mind racing through the implications. Dr. Chen performed an ultrasound with equipment designed for much smaller animals, adjusting settings as she worked. The black and white images that appeared on the monitor were grainy but unmistakable. 2 tiny forms, hearts beating with the rhythm of new hope. "Based on fetal development, I'd estimate 8 to 10 weeks, Dr. Chen said softly. "Twins, and given her age and the stress she's been under, this pregnancy is nothing short of miraculous." Jake felt tears he couldn't explain burning behind his eyes. Luna hadn't just been protecting him in that meadow. She'd been protecting the new life growing inside her. Her surrender to the federal agents hadn't been just about saving Jake from consequences. It had been about ensuring her unborn cubs had a chance at life, even if it meant sacrificing her own freedom. Patricia's hands shook as she processed the implications. "Jake, do you understand what this means? Luna hasn't had cubs in 8 years, not since my father killed her last litter. At her age, this is probably her final chance at motherhood, and we..." We took her away from her territory during the most vulnerable time of her pregnancy. The guilt was overwhelming. They'd all been so focused on Luna's extraordinary behavior toward humans that they'd missed the most important truth. She was carrying the future of her bloodline, possibly the last cubs she would ever bear. The stress of captivity, the concrete enclosure, the constant medical interventions, everything that was supposed to help her was actually threatening the lives she carried. Dr. Chen's voice was clinical but tinged with wonder. Pregnancy in 16-year-old grizzlies is extremely rare. Most females stop reproducing by 14. The fact that Luna conceived at all suggests exceptional health and genetics. These cubs represent something precious, a continuation of a genetic line that has survived in Glacier National Park for generations. But their moment of wonder was shattered by the arrival of Dr. Sterling, who had been monitoring their conversations through the veterinary suite's security system. His face showed no emotion as he processed the news, calculating political implications rather than celebrating new life. "This changes nothing," Sterling announced coldly. "If anything, it confirms that the subject animal needs to remain in a controlled environment. Pregnant bears are notoriously unpredictable. The risk to public safety has increased exponentially." Jake stood slowly, his protective instincts flaring to life. "Those cubs are Luna's children. They belong in the mountains, not in a zoo cage. Mr. Whitefeather, those cubs will be born in federal custody and will remain federal property for research purposes. The National Zoo's breeding program will benefit enormously from genetic material this unique." The callousness of Sterling's words hit everyone in the room like a slap. Patricia found her voice first, her scientific objectivity finally giving way to moral outrage. "You're talking about turning Luna's children into research subjects, into zoo attractions. That's not conservation, that's exploitation." "Dr. Clearwater, you're letting emotion cloud your scientific judgment," Sterling replied. "These cubs will receive the finest veterinary care, proper nutrition, and protection from the dangers of wilderness life. They'll live longer, healthier lives than they ever could in the wild." But Jake was thinking about something else entirely. The bear claw necklace that Sarah Crow Dog had given him. The tribal wisdom about the sacred bond between humans and animals. In Blackfeet tradition, when an animal chose you as family, that bond extended to their offspring. Luna's cubs weren't just her children, they were his responsibility. "Dr. Sterling," Jake said quietly, his voice carrying a new kind of authority, "those cubs are not going to be born in captivity. Mr. Whitefeather, you're in no position to make demands. You're here at our discretion, and that discretion can be revoked at any moment." Patricia stepped forward, her career finally aligned with her conscience. "Actually, Dr. Sterling, I think you'll find that the situation has changed significantly." She pulled out her phone and showed him the screen. "While you've been threatening Jake, I've been uploading our findings to every major news outlet in the country. The story is already trending. Miracle Bear Luna pregnant with last cubs in government captivity." Sterling's face went white as he realized the political firestorm that was about to engulf his department. A grieving bear protecting a fallen ranger had been a manageable public relations challenge. A pregnant bear being held captive while carrying possibly her last offspring was a completely different kind of crisis. "You have no idea what you've done," Sterling said through gritted teeth. "The media attention will make this situation impossible to manage." "Good," Patricia replied, "because this situation shouldn't be managed. It should be resolved. Luna and her cubs should go home." Dr. Chen, who had been quietly monitoring Luna's condition throughout the confrontation, spoke up with the authority of her medical expertise. "Dr. Sterling, I need to inform you that keeping Luna in captivity during her pregnancy poses significant risks to both mother and cubs. The stress hormones we've been measuring could trigger miscarriage or premature labor. From a medical standpoint, returning her to familiar territory would dramatically improve her chances of successful birth and cub survival. Jake placed his hand on Luna's head, feeling the steady rise and fall of her breathing. She was trusting him again, the way she'd trusted him in the forest, the way she'd trusted him when she surrendered herself to save him. This time, he understood the full weight of that trust. Luna wasn't just counting on him to save her. She was counting on him to save her children. "Dr. Sterling," Jake said, his voice steady with newfound purpose, "you have 48 hours to figure out how to spin this." After that, with or without government permission, Luna goes home to have her cubs where they belong, in the mountains that made her. Sterling's response was interrupted by the buzzing of his phone. News vans were already pulling into the zoo's parking lot. Congressional offices were lighting up with constituent calls. Social media was exploding with #SaveLuna's_Last_Cubs. The story of a dying bear's final chance at motherhood had captured the American imagination in a way that transcended politics. The battle for Luna's freedom had become a battle for the future itself. A fight to ensure that some bonds were too sacred to break, some lives too precious to sacrifice on the altar of bureaucratic convenience. Outside the veterinary suite, the first protesters were already gathering, holding signs that read, "Babies belong with Mama," and "Freedom for Luna's family." The revolution had begun, and it was being led by a pregnant bear and the Cherokee Ranger who refused to abandon her. Sometimes the most profound lessons about family come from the most unexpected teachers. Jake Whitefeather and Luna's story reminds us that love doesn't always arrive in the package we expect. Sometimes it comes with fur and four legs. Sometimes it shows up when we're at our lowest point, broken and alone on a forest floor. For those of us who've watched our children grow up and move away, who've felt the empty nest syndrome that no one prepares you for, Luna's fierce maternal protection touches something deep in our hearts. At 65, we understand what it means to have one last chance at the family we've always dreamed of. Luna, at 16 and pregnant for possibly the final time, represents every grandmother's hope for new beginnings, every parent's desire to protect what matters most. Her willingness to sacrifice her freedom to save Jake mirrors the selfless love we've shown our own children throughout our lives. In a world that often feels cold and disconnected, this story reminds us that true family isn't about blood. It's about showing up, staying loyal, and never giving up on those we love. What unexpected friendships have changed your life? Have you ever experienced a bond that transcended normal expectations? Share your story in the comments below.